Morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network, and this is Maggie. And today's topic is thresholds. And we often talk about the need to set boundaries. We all know that there's a need periodically to do so, but oftentimes we don't realize that we need to set boundaries until they've been breached. So let's look at the threshold and this magical place of choice that is between enough and too much. And that can apply in all different areas of life. But before we get started, let's take a minute to get settled in and present. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome, welcome. Happy Monday to you. So we're going to just settle in right now. Take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen just flooding your lungs and flowing into your bloodstream and nourishing every cell, every organ, and bringing life, vital life energy throughout your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, any stress, fatigue, negativity. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, electrifying, energizing, illuminating all your molecules and electrons, all your cells, lighting you up from the inside out so you glow forth into the world. And as you exhale any tension, any stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together and just really softly rub your fingers against your palms, tickling and feeling the tingling and that wonderful sensation as we bring ourselves present to being physical and all the wonderful sensations that we get to experience. Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's wonderful to be here with you. Welcome, Susan. And it's a new week, and welcome to everybody who's joining us. It's wonderful to be here with you. Here it looks like a beautiful spring day outside, and yeah, it's getting to be spring. So we are on a threshold, right? Good morning, Gia. Welcome, welcome. Great to have you with us. So thresholds, these are thresholds of change and also thresholds of enough versus too much. Good morning, Robert. Welcome, welcome. Great to have you guys and everybody else who's joining us. So I don't know about you, but I've noticed as far as boundaries go a lot in my life that I didn't know that I needed to set a boundary until it was already breached. And I think that as we awaken to our, good morning, Tammy, welcome, welcome. As we awaken to our inner voice, as we listen more to the stirrings of our hearts and souls, we can better recognize where we need to say enough is enough or more would be too much. And Maggie's feeling her oats this morning. I mean, she knows it's spring. She's just crazy today. Very, very, very energetic. Lots of nipping and biting. She's saying, yep, that's true. Anyway, so this idea of threshold moments, I want to talk about threshold moments and how when we're tuned in, we can recognize when enough is enough. And we don't have to overstep our own boundaries. We don't have to breach our own boundaries before recognizing that we need to say enough, or we need to choose to put on a limit to something. Good morning, Andrea. Welcome. It's great to have you here with us. So these threshold moments, we have thresholds between pleasure and pain. We have thresholds between, in exercise, for instance. I thought of this topic actually because I was lent a sauna, one of these wonderful portable far infrared saunas by a friend a while ago. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful thing for me. And a couple weeks ago, I did the sauna, and when I did, I overdid it. And I really, it took me back, and I needed to recover. And this morning was the first time since then that I've taken a sauna. And I, it got really, really hot, and I usually set it for a half hour. And in that time, at about 20 minutes past today, I felt like I felt signals in my body, which in the past I have often just overridden. You not ignored, but overridden them. And today I just chose to honor those signals. So I reached my threshold. I was at that point. So there's a point of optimization, I think, and recognizing that point, that threshold in our interactions with each other, in our experiences with our health. All of these places are important places to be able to recognize these thresholds so that we honor our body and our being without extending ourselves, maybe to stretch a bit, but not to overextend. It's like when you work out, you can work out so that you've done a really good healthy burn, and then you can overdo it and tear muscles and ligaments and things like that. And the same thing with, in this case, the sauna. And it's also the same case in certain interactions where we have an ability to tolerate a certain amount of maybe friction or challenge in our communications. And at a certain point, we get to say enough before it becomes too much. And so how do we recognize these threshold moments? Let's look at where this choice point comes in, because I think it's a magical point. It's a magical place to be able to recognize our threshold and to honor ourselves enough to not go beyond the point of damage, right? Damage to ourselves, damage to others. You know, we might find that in a given situation, we have certain amount of patience, but beyond that point, it could be explosive. So maybe we get to recognize our threshold and remove ourselves gracefully before we reach that over the limit point. I've been playing a little bit, admittedly, haphazardly, with the Wim Hof breathing method. And one of the parts of that method is you do these deep breaths, inhale, exhale, 30 times, and then hold your breath. And that's been a really, really interesting experiment for me to recognize threshold. You know, it's like, when can I push it a little without going over the edge? You know, like what is it to get right to that edge without going over the edge? Like to get as far up to the edge as possible without going over. And it's taken me a lifetime to be able to recognize these threshold moments for myself more and more. Not even to say that I always do, because I can't say that I always do, but I am better at recognizing and respecting and honoring them. Yes, I'll push myself, but I used to just go right off the cliff without even knowing it, and then spending a tremendous amount of time having to recover. And now I'm more mindful of where that edge is. So Rosalind says, going to bed for rest rather than staying up late. That's a really good one. That's a really good threshold, is when is it that I'm going to actually let myself go to sleep? Tomorrow is another day to complete unfinished tasks. 100%, Rosalind. If I do need to stay up, I take time for a 20-minute nap. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And also this idea of, having to push ourselves to do everything. It comes into the choice between doing and being, and recognizing our being needs, recognizing that our well-being is more important than our doing. There is a lot of doing that we end up becoming the object of, rather than the doer of, where the doing dictates our lives more than our beingness. And there are times when the doing is the most important thing, but it's rare. It's much more rare than we make it, that we absolutely have to do this now. It's that's more of a rarity, I think, than we make it in our choices. And it's really important to be honoring ourselves in our day-to-day lives, in our choices. And the thing is that if we go beyond that threshold, what happens is the recovery time is way more than had we made the choice to honor our inner guidance. So I'm wondering, and thank you so much for sharing that, Rosalind. So taking a 20-minute nap in order to rejuvenate yourself enough to go further, that's awesome. But there are times when enough is enough. And I think that this is part of wisdom as we get older. I hope that we get to recognize, honor, and respect the signals that we give ourselves before we surpass our capacity and do damage. So sometimes, like I said, I think it's a good idea to stretch. I think stretching is good, but you want to stretch not beyond the point of breaking or snapping, right? And so how do you recognize these signals? What is it like for you to recognize? What kind of signals do you get? So today, for instance, in the sauna, I started feeling my heart going a little bit differently. I started feeling like a sensation kind of moving up my back into my head. And I was like, okay, that's good. I'm good. And in the past, I've kind of had an intention and an expectation that I would do the full 30 minutes. Well, it wasn't good for me to do that today. And so I didn't. Maybe tomorrow, if I choose to have a sauna, the 30 minutes will be fine. But to be challenging oneself without being destructive to oneself. How do we find those thresholds? Those thresholds are points of exhilaration, I think, and they're massive choice points. And by exercising them, I think that we exercise a certain wisdom, respect, intelligence, compassion for ourselves, etc. So what are your experiences? What kind of thresholds have you experienced? So I know Rosalind talking about when to go to bed for rest, rather than doing. Or even watching TV or something too late, or looking on your phone too late, or, where you're beyond tired. I think that I've done that a bunch, where I've waited until I'm too tired and then I can't fall asleep sometimes. So what kinds of thresholds have you recognized in your experience? I think there are thresholds maybe with eating, where when is enough enough? When are we sated? When are we satisfied? uh, are we going to continue to finish whatever's on our plate, or are we able to put the fork down when our body says that's enough? I know that that has historically been a challenge for me in my life, you know, to say enough is enough. When it comes to food, I used to have a big time overeating issue that I struggled with for years. So I'm wondering, what kinds of thresholds are you aware of in your life? And maybe there are even others, you know, like um, I think it's also a conversation between pushing ourselves and stretching ourselves. So in stretching ourselves, maybe we're pushing ourselves a bit, pushing a limit a little bit. And when we push that limit a little bit, we can expand ourselves and expand ourselves and expand ourselves. And the thing is that there is a place where you push that limit so much that you go off the edge. And it's a delicate balance sometimes to recognize where is that transition point. It can be elusive until or as we're learning to better listen to our own signals. So we might have signals in our physiology. We might have signals by like just a gut feeling or I've had sensations that I would just talk about as blood surges because I don't know how else to talk about them, but maybe like feeling a temperature surge or something, or a shift of heartbeat, or a shift of breath, or like a pressure in the chest, or a constriction of the belly, or maybe a tightening of your shoulders. Good morning, Dennis. Welcome, welcome. Great to have you here. And it's so good to be here with all of you. Today, what we're talking about is thresholds and how we, you know, where is that transition point? How do we recognize the transition point between enough and too much? And noticing that transition point coming to a place of choice and consciousness. So I think that what we're really talking about fundamentally here is this state of awareness, of mindfulness, where we're present to the signals that we're receiving from ourselves and also from the environment. Maybe we're not just pushing ourselves, maybe we're pushing someone else. And maybe there's a point to which pushing that other person is good, and there may be a point at which it goes over the threshold. And so, or encouraging someone, or commiserating with someone, there may be a point where it goes over a threshold. And that there's that magical place of balance that's almost between worlds, where we're in the place of expansion without breaking. Because, you know, you can just blow up a balloon, blow up a balloon, blow up a balloon. It gets really tight. It gets really tight. It gets really tight. And then if you keep going, it bursts. And that's really what we're talking about, is that magical place where we are optimized, or our situation is optimized, or our feeling is optimized without going over the edge. And I think that this is such a, good morning, Robin, welcome, welcome. Great to have you here. I think it's an important thing for us to be looking at, because culturally we're kind of conditioned to push and push and push and push, and often push ourselves beyond our capacity, or beyond our healthy capacity. And I I think that it really does come down to a conversation about mindfulness, about being awake and aware as to the signals that we're receiving, and to be present to those signals and responsive, to be respectful enough and compassionate enough for ourselves and for others to recognize and respect those thresholds, not out of fear, but out of awareness, out of presence. And I'm wondering if you guys want to share any of the tools or the signals that you've had about these threshold moments, and maybe times when you've gone beyond those moments. So Rosalind says, as people start to work in the office more, my flow gets haphazard when I don't spend enough time preparing for the next workday. Meals are easy when working from home. That great point. And Rosalind goes on, when I don't bring my lunch, I end up eating out and not as nutritious as something I could have brought from home. When I get thirsty or my stomach gets bloated, it's a sign I need to eat better. For me, that means bringing my lunch to work. So it requires some discipline to get time aside to prep my meal the night before. So this is just a really beautiful, beautiful, practical example, Rosalind. Thank you so much for sharing how this threshold thing comes into play on a practical basis. So we recognize that we have certain nutritional needs, and when we don't pay attention to those, then we suffer a physical consequence. So what does it mean in order to be respectful of that threshold? It means making some time for yourself to be able to fulfill the requirements of self-care. So that's awesome. Great example. Thank you. And these are little things perhaps on the surface, but our nourishment and our physical well-being is very much a part of what we're able to affect in the world, right? So when we nourish and nurture ourselves by taking care of our nutritional needs, then we nourish ourselves beyond that into being able to function well as a whole. So great example, Rosalind. Thank you so much for that. I'm wondering if anybody else has anything to share around these threshold moments, or places where you're learning to honor your the word that comes to mind is limits, but I don't necessarily want to address them as limits, because I think they're not limits, they're thresholds, and they change. They change from day to day, they change from moment to moment, they change based on circumstance sometimes. So we can have different thresholds. So for instance, maybe you do intermittent fasting. There may be a point where you're feeling hunger pains in your body, or you're feeling hunger impulses, and they get to a point where you say, okay, now's the right time to eat. If I don't eat now, I feel sick. Do you know? I do intermittent fasting, so I am also paying more attention to those signals, to recognize when should I let that signal pass and when should I honor that signal. Rosalind says, how about credit card limits? Staying within a budget. You know what? That's a great analogy too. So what we're talking about is our personal budgets. And if you breach the limit, then there's hell to pay, right? There's consequences. And staying within a budget Uh, Oftentimes our credit card limits are way higher than our budget would support, right? Because, hey, there's the money on the card, so we can spend it. And what happens is that we can sometimes easily overspend. And I think that's really what we're talking about here is overspending our individual resources. You know, we can stretch them and sometimes in a healthy way, hopefully in a healthy way. But when we go beyond the limits, then there are big consequences. And I think that works with finance, it works with food, it works with energy, it works with relationships. And Robert says, working as a care worker on the front line during the lockdown and during the Christmas holidays, we were outnumbered and had to work for almost a month every day. Wow. I've had some days like that in my life, Robert. That's pretty intense. Brought most of us to exhaustion. I hear you. I have a few ways of recharging my energy. The nose and temples exercise that I shared with you is one of them. I think that was rubbing the bridge of your nose was one of them, I think. And rubbing your temples, as I remember. Please let me know if I got that right. But even with those, it was too much. And so I totally relate with to you about getting just completely exhausted. The way that I had my coaching program set up previously, I it was just constant, and I really didn't realize how depleted I had become until I was way over the edge. And it took me a really long time to recover and make corrections and adjustments. So I totally relate, Robert. And this is where care workers often get overburdened, you know, in the process of their job and of the care that they're giving other people, prioritizing others over themselves. And this is a perfect example of how it's essential for us to care for ourselves in order to be able to give to the world. Rosalind says, what's the threshold when you've gone over budget? Going to restaurant dips, don't want to eat top ramen. Let's see, what is the threshold of when you've gone over budget? Going to restaurant dips, don't want to eat top ramen. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I'm saying, what's the threshold of when you've gone over budget? I think when you've gone over budget, you don't have the resources to take care of necessities at the very least. You know, so like you're saying, having to eat ramen. I've been in phases in my life where I really didn't know about budgeting and or I knew about it, but it didn't have anything to do with me. And I went through periods of eating oatmeal for a lot of time because I was not able to afford other food. So I think that we've got the threshold for going over budget is even before we get to that point. Um, I think the threshold for going over budget is when I think it's going to be different for everybody. I'm going to leave it at that and say it's going to be different for everybody for sure. But when we notice that we don't have the freedom to buy groceries, um, even if it's moderated, maybe that's a good signal. I, I budgeting is a really challenging and individual thing, and not all of us have the resources to have the bounty that others have. And so what is budget for one person doesn't really apply necessarily for another. So Christina says, good morning. I'm learning to fit exercise in more as well as nature. I'm continuing to learn my body's needs and understanding that those needs may fluctuate and change. Exactly, Christina. Really great. I'm really delighted that you called that out, is that the threshold in one moment may not be the same as the threshold in another. So like I was talking about with the sauna example, some days I'm able to do the 30 minutes without an issue. Today I was only able to do 20, and I knew not to push it beyond that. So the needs fluctuate and change, and that's where presence comes in. And Robert says, yes, those were the right exercises. So to bring yourself back to energy and presence, to rub the bridge of your nose and to rub your temples. Thank you for reminding us of that, Robert. That's really helpful. And Robin, welcome, welcome. Robin says, being a caregiver, I stretch myself often. I'm working to pay attention to my well-being. Wow. Yes, it's really, really important, because if you don't pay attention to your well-being, how can you really continue to care for others? We tend to sacrifice ourselves, and that in the ultimate form doesn't do anybody any good. Christina says, I'm bringing together a free or extremely low-cost caregiver workshop based off my 12 and going years experience, both in care and personal life. That's awesome. So when you're talking about a caregiver workshop, Christina, is it a workshop to become a caregiver, or is it a workshop for caregivers to learn to care for themselves? I'm just curious. And Robert said, I needed to remind myself as I feel a bit depleted today. Ah, okay. So now you get to remind yourself about these wonderful, rejuvenating, reinvigorating exercises. And I find this is also another really good one. If you put your palm across your forehead and your other hand at the base of your skull, and breathe and kind of allow the energy to normalize. That's a huge stress releaser, just to hold in these two places until you take a deep breath. Oh, I guess I had some stress that I wasn't even aware of. So yes, thresholds. So today, workshop for caregivers. Wonderful, Christina. So when you have it together, feel free to remind me, and we can plug it here for the caregivers among us who would benefit from better self-care. I think that that's probably a pervasive issue, is self-care for caregivers. So Rosalind says, sorry, dipping into other pools of money set aside for payments that come less frequent than once a month. Aha. Okay, so that's going beyond budget, dipping into other pools of money. I defer some of my paycheck automatically to an account I don't really have access to. That's brilliant. That's really smart. If I don't see it, then the funds are set aside and out of mind. That's a great thing to do. So when an annual payment comes, like property taxes, I've saved enough through the year to pay it off. Well, Rosalind, that's brilliant budgeting. I think, there is something to be said about out of sight, out of mind. And this is one of the reasons that credit cards can be so dangerous, because we don't see the balance in front of us when we're making a transfer of money. And so maybe that's a good way to keep yourself in check with credit cards, is every time you're going to make a purchase, every time you consider making a purchase, first to go and check your balances and your bank accounts before you make the purchase. I don't know if many people have the discipline to do that, but it might be a deterrent to spending that, making whatever that purchase is. So, and I think the same thing with budgeting, that budgeting fluctuates as well, based on our income, based on our expenses. Anyway, I think this thought of thresholds is a good one to ponder to be looking at thresholds in all different circumstances. Where are you okay in a conversation, okay in a conversation, okay, and then all of a sudden it's fury. It's like, it's too much, you're pushing me, you're pushing me, you're pushing me, okay, now I'm pissed. Where is that threshold? And maybe we get to, instead of um, staying in that situation, maybe we get to remove ourselves, or to shift our behavior as we recognize these thresholds without having to go beyond them. So yeah, that's it for today. Welcome to a new week. Thank you so much for sharing this part of your Monday with me. I'm Mira Rubin, and this is the Core Connection. And Maggie and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. This week is Earth Day, and I am excited. I'm just checking. Yes, this week is Earth Day, and I am excited to share that I will be doing the first sustainability hour. Maggie and I will be doing the first sustainability hour on At One with the Earth through Enlightened World Network. So I hope you'll join us. That's going to be at from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time this Wednesday. And I'm looking forward to sharing that time with you, and looking at what it takes for us to be able to dream this world into being that we so dearly envision. And I look forward to doing that with you. So until next time, let's look at these magical threshold moments where we have choice, and that choice can move us into a better, or a richer, more awakened place in our lives, in our behaviors, in our interactions. So until next time, so much love.